It's Sam, and I'm speaking to you today about the 7th house in Vedic Astrology, the famous 7th house. Relationships, relationship happiness, and those deep interactions where we have to harmonize and compromise with others. That's really the nature of the 7th house. It's easy to just think that they're romantic relationships, but they're actually all relationships where two adults are engaged and trying to harmonize their energy. So, we have many different kinds of relationships. If we're a parent, then we have a relationship to our children, parent-child. Also, teacher-student is a similar 5th house relationship. We have a relationship to our teachers where we're in the 5th house and they're in the 9th house, right? Where they're the 9th house to us. And then, the dog's getting restless. Then there's also, we have a relationship to our subordinates and our, let's say, workers or people that work below us, let's say at a job. We have people that have authority over us. All of these are different relationships. Of course, we have a relationship with our siblings, 3rd house, all of that. But 7th house is when there's two equals. And not just two equals who are hanging out, that's actually also 3rd house. That's very much like the sibling relationship. Two equals who are just sort of working laterally with each other. But 7th house is where two adults have mutual desires, the big one, mutual desires, and those desires can only be fulfilled with the cooperation of the other person. So that's how you really want to think about it. And it's actually as much a sort of business relationship as it is a romantic one. We tend to oversimplify we tend to oversimplify astrology and say, 7th house, my relationships, what does that mean? First of all, it's the most concentrated form of desire with another person. It's sort of like the culmination of our individual desires and another person's individual desires moving toward a larger goal. So it's actually where we're trying to elevate our personal desires, which is the 3rd house, and connect them with another person. So it's two individuals with mutual desires that can only be fulfilled with the cooperation of the other person. And so, of course, there's a lot that can be said for what happens when we sort of compound our personal pleasure. Of course, the simplest way to understand it, of course, is in a romantic relationship, because the 7th house, for example, gets us involved in things like, of course, sex. And by the way, sex is not the 8th house. I know, especially in people who come from Western astrology, they say, sex, death, rebirth, 8th house. It's not the case. I'm going to talk about the 8th house next. But the 7th house is actually sex between two people. It means me fulfilling my desires with you, with another human, with another human being, with another body. So there's no sex unless there's the 7th house, because that brings two people, and it's a house of desire, a house of kama. So of course it's easy to see it in that romantic relationship. But again, what we see in that most kind of physical and obvious way is that you're not going to fulfill your desire with that person without their cooperation. Otherwise, it's a violation, right? Otherwise, it's what you might call rape, for example. And so you can also see that once you break connection with another person, one of the first things that happens is you ain't getting any, right? So when you have that argument, you break the connection. Those mutual desires aren't in sync anymore, and you're not going to join and merge and copulate and physically merge your energy with another person. So you see it very clearly in the romantic relationship, but you want to also think again about things like in a business partnership. It's also very similar. you compound your effort. So the effort that you have gets compounded and mixed with another person, and it creates an even higher level of accomplishment and power with you and with them. So you want to see it as a real multiplying influence. And again, literally you can see where two people come together and their energy multiplies in such a way that they create a child. Especially, obviously if it's a man or a woman. You're not going to create a child without some kind of intercourse and inter-engagement happening. You can see the obvious byproduct of a man and a woman in a relationship is a child. But in a business partnership, it's also very similar. The two people in the business agreement create a business, and something that's higher and emergent comes forth. Something emerges from that partnership that can only emerge with the cooperation of the two people. So the seventh house, you really want to see it more subtly as this negotiation between two equals, two adults that are equal. Not a parent and a child, or a boss and an employee, or you and an employer or anything. It's two adults on equal footing who can only fulfill their desires with the cooperation of the other person. And the thing that is clear to understand is that negotiated agreement is as varied and subtle and complex as the people involved. Everyone is different, yet they all retain a similar energy based on your tendency to cooperate or what you're looking for in a partner and how your pattern of energy mixes with theirs. So this is why you see every, let's say, romantic relationship is a bit of a different negotiation, but it all kind of revolves around you, how you're negotiating, because you're the common thread in all of your relationships, right? And so, when someone has a good compatibility with you, it's because your style and what you're looking for in order to feel respected and honored and appreciated isn't clashing so much with their natural tendencies. And so again, the big, the currency of the seventh house is that mutual respect and honoring and appreciation. This is the sort of currency that either gets paid or burned or destroyed, because when we feel, and again, that's based on each individual, because everyone's paradigm of appreciation and feeling valued is going to be different. Some people, for instance, their realm of appreciation and value might be something that's actually devaluing, even something like S&M, or some people who have all kinds of ways that they experience their personal style or whatever. So every negotiation and every relationship is different. You can see it clearly in the romantic one, but again, even in the business relationship, everything has to be negotiated a little bit. All those personal styles still come into play, and if you don't get along on that personal level, or your personalities sort of clash, two big egos have a hard time getting along, so you always have this kind of dynamic of a sort of masculine and a sort of feminine, and a kind of way where people feel heard and respected. So you want to also understand that it's a negotiated arrangement, and it's also an angular house. So the seventh house is also a house. It's an angular house that's a great structure in your life when you're able to do it with like an individual. Now this is actually two individuals initially, at least that's where we learn the lesson. Like every astrological principle, it's quite subtle, because we actually learn our capacity to really manage and compromise and align our individual desires with another person is learned in sort of the romantic relationship, or in our deep interactions. But they spiral upward, like I said, for instance, like the same skills are used in business relationships, in all kinds of relationships eventually. But we also have to understand that those things become a great structure in our life. So for example, relationships are an angular, the seventh house is an angular house, which shows a very solid foundation in your life. So you're not always out looking for it, and you don't have that support from another person when you don't do it well. Then you're feeling alone, and you're always wondering when you're going to meet the other one. And when you have it, and you're good at that, and you can kind of settle it, it becomes a very powerful foundation in your life. And you want to understand this connection. The seventh house this is a tricky house of this. This is a tricky part of the zodiac, like I said before. It's houses 5, 6, 7, and 8. The seventh house is the exit point of the sixth house and the origin point of the eighth house. So it's where all of that sixth house energy and difficulty and stress that I talked about, where we're willing to handle any kind of BS if it's related to something we love or the people we love, like our children. But everybody else we wind up in battle with, including...
Boy, these dogs are going at it, huh?
including they're not having a good seventh house. They're in the sixth house, right? Including those romantic partners that we get in the fifth house, because fifth house is also romantic partners. If we're willing to serve the relationship itself in the sixth and be more of service to it, then we get the marriage in the seventh. And our romantic partner, who we really love in the fifth house, our heart's desire, through service, humility, and those virtues of the sixth house, then becomes our marriage partner in the seventh. So this is how the sixth goes in between the fifth and the seventh. My heart's desire in the fifth, I'm willing to serve the relationship in the sixth and not be such a hard-headed, egotistical maniac. Then I get the romantic relationship and the romantic partner, that structure, in the seventh. So the seventh house exists between the effort, sacrifice of the sixth, and whether we're willing to do it or not. Because again, in order to have a good seventh house compromise and settlement, you need to be humble. You need to start with a certain amount of humility that says, I'm not alone in the world. You've been humbled by the struggles and the difficulties of life, and you realize that you want some help, and you love that good feeling of, being able to confide in others and to help support others. So the humility of the sixth house, humility or humiliation, regardless of, based on how we feel it, leads to the seventh house structure, compromise, willingness to stay engaged with another person and work it out. And then that leads to the insecurities and stresses and fears of the eighth house, which is really what the eighth house is. The eighth house is actually the insecurity and the lack of control and those things that we get once we become intimately involved with someone in the seventh house, which is the most deeply intimate contact we have with another individual. It exposes all of our inability to control ourselves and to control another person in the eighth house. So I'll talk about that in the next video, the one on the eighth house.